Welcome to JWC Livestream. This is Sublimated Poesy with Ricky and David. Today we have a special guest, Tom Tiernan. He's from our Thursday show, Story Autopsy with Ricky and Tom. Tom's just here kind of as a ride-along guest. Maybe we'll have some pleasant interaction with him, kind of seeing what's going on. This is a crazy world we live in, folks. So it's always best to find the things that bring you bliss. And in my case, that's the transcendent force of creativity. That's what we're about here on Sublimated Poesy with Ricky and David. We're about the poetic force, if it be in poetry or if it be in poetic prose, helping with voice fulfillment to help you become a different writer, perhaps a better writer, but different. That's the core. I write with flowers, if you can dig what I'm saying. I throw down a lot of detail, a lot of poetry in my stuff. And I think that that's an important thing. I think it's something that's going out of writing. I've been working on this Athenaeum book with David. It's been a great time, having a lot of fun and learning stuff about collaborations and whatnot. It's very, very cool. Informing my own process. And I'm coming around the bend on my sci-fi novel, Chiron 6. I'd say in like another week, I should be like halfway done with both narrative threads, and having a blast with that book too. Throwing down chapters. It's great. David, how are you, man? How have things been?
Oh, everything's been going great. Started a new project outlining a novel called Billy, and it seems like it might be very promising. So, and I'm also working on the novel with you, Athenaeum, and I find it to be sort of this exploration of a literary tradition too, as well as just telling a tale. So I'm very excited. We're about halfway through writing this book, and it's been a lot of fun to write it. And this is a very good space to collaborate with people in. So I highly recommend anyone listening to this recording that they go over to JWC and follow them on the Twitter page and get in touch with Ricky and make that leap. It'll be an excellent investment of your time.
Right on, right on. Yeah, that Billy project is an awesome idea. Can't really disclose it. David presented it to me, the premise of it the other day, and I was like, wow, like he's got to write this book. Between that and Athenaeum, I think it's, suffice it to say, we've been having a blast. And it's just been great stuff. So we have one poem today, kind of in the subject of poetic reflections and horror, being that it's October, being that we're getting near the Halloween season. We figured we would spook you out for the last, for all 4 weeks of October. Last week's was pretty ghoulish with the Raven and the Witch. So this is The Face in the Mirror by Robert Graves. Gray haunted eyes, absent-mindedly glaring from wide, uneven orbits, one brow drooping somewhat over the eye because of a missile fragment still inhering. skin deep as a foolish record of old world fighting. Crookedly broken nose, low tackling caused it, cheeks furrowed, coarse gray hair, flying frenetic forehead, wrinkled and high, jowls prominent, ears large, jaw pugilistic, teeth few, lips full and ruddy, mouth ascetic. I pause with razor poised, scowling derision at the mirrored man whose beard needs my attention, and once more ask him why he still stands ready with a boy's presumption to court the queen in her high silk pavilion. So that's a nice little exploration there of self-reflection. There's a diagnostic being done of his weathered, aged form, and it seems a very honest one. But then by the end of the poem, he explains how he would be willing to court the queen. So he still thinks much of himself. He still thinks with pride that he is handsome and that he's capable of anything. So the age has not eroded that from him. That has not been withered or weathered away. And I do love the language there, the language play, as our in-house poet likes to say. Really a cool little piece. Got to get into Graves a little bit more. David, what did you think of that one, man?
When I was at the Art Institute of Chicago, I had an instructor for one term who told the classroom, until you can look in the mirror and write something beautiful about your ugliness, you're not a writer.
That's a piece of wisdom as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, that's what I have to say about this poem.
That wraps it up and puts a bow on it nicely. This type of self-analysis is not just good for the features, the aspect, but for the actual soul beneath, the feeling we got, the vibe. I can dig it, and I think it's a representation of the honesty that it takes in order to accurately reflect on oneself. And it's just as much a sketch as any other poem about, even an object or something, but it goes deeper. It goes it penetrates and goes through into the spiritual level beneath. Tom, what did you think of that poem? I know you're not much of a poet, but
this is my kind of poem.
Dig it, yeah.
I think it reflects the guy who's sort of accepting of himself and his own skin, and carry on with life in spite of the ugliness, possibly perceived by others. But he says, "Hey, I'm okay with that. I can even go visit the queen, as is. I'm good."
Yeah, it's pretty wild, man.
Is this the same Robert Graves that wrote The Golden Bough? Is this an older poem?
That is to be directed at David, because I'm not familiar with the poet.
I think it's a different poet, but he did write. He did some translations of the Odyssey and the Iliad, and
might be the same guy I'm thinking of. This is like a century ago, maybe more.
Yeah, this is
okay. Very highly regarded in the
actually early 20th century, I should say.
Okay.
Okay, well, that's cool. It was a great poem. Got to make me a reading list out of poets that do that kind of job, It
might be an excellent project in the future for JWC to produce an anthology of poets, classic poems that can be used as a teaching tool to writers.
That is a very nice idea.
Yes.
Worth exploring. We'll have to talk about that at a later date. That would be beneficial for what we're trying to do and how we're trying to help people gain poetic voice fulfillment with their own prose. You know, even something like that can help accelerate that process. Sure wouldn't hurt it. Well, that was a great poem. Thank you for choosing that one, David. This is now the prose section where we read a prose piece that can be compared or complement or in some way reflects on the poem. So you wouldn't be able to get through a Halloween show or a Halloween season on JWC without hearing mention of old Lovecraft, who Stephen King once remarked was the best horror writer of the 20th century. And that's coming from Stephen King. Stephen King's known for his creepy tales last time I checked. So this is The Outsider, one of my favorites that Lovecraft made. So that night the Baron dreamt of many a woe, and all his warrior guests with shade and form of witch and demon and large coffin worm were long benightmared by Keats. Unhappy is he to whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness. Wretched is he who looks back upon lone hours in vast and dismal chambers, with brown hangings and maddened rows of antique books, and upon odd watches in twilight groves of grotesque, gigantic, and vine-encumbered trees that silently wave twisted branches far aloft. Such a lot the gods gave to me, the dazed, the disappointed, the barren, the broken. And yet I am strangely content and cling desperately to those seer moments when my mind momentarily threatens to reach beyond to the other. I know not where I was born, save that the castle was infinitely old and infinitely horrible, full of dark passages and having high ceilings where the eye could find only cobwebs and shadows. The stones in the crumbling corridors seemed always hideously damp, and there was an accursed smell everywhere, as of the piled up corpses of dead generations. It was never light, so that I used sometimes to light candles and gaze steadily at them for relief. Nor was there any sun outdoors, since the terrible trees grew high above the topmost accessible tower. And there was one black tower which reached above the trees into the unknown outer sky, but that was partly ruined and could not be ascended, saved by well-nigh impossible climb up to the sheer wall, stone by stone. I must have lived in this place, but I cannot measure the time. Beings must have cared for my needs. Yet I cannot recall any person except myself or anything alive but the noiseless rats and bats and spiders. I think that whoever nursed me must have been shockingly aged, since my first conception of a living person was that of something mockingly like myself, yet distorted, shriveled, and decaying like the castle. To me, there was nothing grotesque in the bones and skeletons that strewn some of the stone crypts deep down among the foundations. I fantastically associated these things with everyday events and thought them more natural than the colored pictures of living beings which I found in many of the moldy books. From such books I learned all that I know. No teacher urged or guided me, and I do not recall hearing any human voice in all those years, not even my own. For although I had read of speech, I had never thought to try to speak aloud. My aspect was a matter equally unthought of, for there were no mirrors in the castle, and I merely regarded myself by instinct as akin to the youthful figures I saw drawn and painted in the books. I felt conscious of youth because I remembered so little. Outside, across the putrid moat, and under the dark, mute trees, I would often lie and dream for hours about what I read in the books, and would longingly picture myself amidst gay crowds in the sunny world beyond the endless forest. Once I tried to escape from the forest, but I went farther from the castle. But as I went farther from the castle, the shade grew denser and the air more filled with brooding fear, so that I ran frantically back, lest I lost my way in a labyrinth of nighted silence. So through endless twilights, I dreamed and waited, though I knew not what I waited for. Then in a shadowy solitude, my longing for light grew so frantic that I could rest no more, and I lifted entreating hands to the single black ruined tower that reached above the forest into the unknown outer sky. And at last I resolved to scale that tower, fall though I may, fall though I might, since it were better to glimpse the sky and perish than to live without ever beholding day. In the dank twilight, I climbed the worn and aged stone stairs till I reached the level where they ceased, and thereafter clung perilously to small footholds leading upward. Ghastly and terrible was that dead, stairless cylinder of rock, black, ruined, and deserted, and sinister, with startled bats whose wings made no noise. But more ghastly and terrible still was the slowness of my progress. For climb as I might, the darkness overhead grew no thinner, and a new chill, as of haunted and venerable mold, assailed me. I shivered as I wondered why I did not reach the light, and would have looked down had I dared. I fancied that night had come suddenly upon me, and vainly groped with one free hand for a window embrasure, that I might peer out and above, and try to judge the height I had attained. All at once, after an infinity of awesome, sightless crawling up that concave and desperate precipice, I felt my head touch a solid thing, and I knew I must have gained the roof, or at least some kind of floor. In the darkness, I raised my free hand and tested the barrier, finding it stone and immovable. Then came a deadly circuit of the tower, clinging to whatever holds the slimy wall could give, till finally my testing hand found the barrier yielding, and I turned upward again, pushing the slab of or door with my head as I used both hands in my fearful ascent. There was no light revealed above. And as my hands went higher, I knew that my climb was for the nonce ended, since the slab was the trap door of an aperture leading to a level stone surface of greater circumference than the lower tower, no doubt the floor of some lofty and capacious observation chamber. I crawled through carefully and tried to prevent the heavy slab from falling back into place, but failed in the latter attempt. As I lay exhausted on the stone floor, I heard the eerie echoes of its fall, but hoped when necessary to pry it open again. Believing I was now at a prodigious height, far above the accursed branches of the wood, I dragged myself up from the floor and fumbled about for windows that I might look for the first time upon the sky and the moon and stars of which I had read. But on every hand I was disappointed, since all that I found were vast shelves of marble, bearing odious oblong boxes of disturbing size. More and more I reflected and wondered what hoary secrets might abide in this high apartment, so many eons cut off from the castle below. Then unexpectedly my hands came upon a doorway where hung a portal of stone, rough with strange chiseling. Trying it, I found it locked, but with a supreme burst of strength, I overcame all obstacles and dragged it open inward. As I did so, there came to me the purest ecstasy that I have ever known. For shining tranquility through an ornate grating of iron and down a short stone passageway of steps that ascended from the newly found doorway was the radiant full moon, which I had never before seen save in dreams and in vague visions I dared not call memories. Fancying now that I had attained the very pinnacle of the castle, I commenced to rush up the few steps beyond the door. But the sudden veiling of the moon by a cloud caused me to stumble, and I felt my way more slowly in the dark. It was still very dark when I reached the grating, which I tried carefully and found unlocked, but which I did not open for fear of falling from the amazing height to which I had climbed. Then the moon came out. Most demoniacal of all shocks is that the abysmally unexpected and grotesquely unbelievable. Nothing I had ever undergone could compare in terror with what I now saw, with the bizarre marvels that sight implied. The sight itself was as simple as it was stupefying, for it was merely this. Instead of a dizzying prospect of treetops seen from a lofty eminence, there stretched around me on a level through the grating nothing less than the solid ground, decked and diversified by marble slabs and columns, and overshadowed by an ancient stone church whose ruined spire gleamed spectrally in the moonlight. Half unconscious, I opened the grating and staggered out upon the white gravel path that stretched away in two directions. My mind, stunned and chaotic as it was, still held the frantic craving for light. And not even the fantastic wonder which had happened could stay my course. I neither knew nor cared whether my experience was insanity, dreaming, or magic, but was determined to gaze on brilliance and gaiety at any cost. I knew not who I was or what my surroundings might be. Though I continued to stumble along, I became conscious of a kind of fearsome latent memory that made my progress not wholly fortuitous. I passed under an arch out of that region of slabs and columns, wandered through the open country, sometimes following the visible road, but sometimes leaving it curiously to tread across meadows where only occasional ruins bespoke ancient presence of a forgotten road. Once I swam across a swift river where crumbling mossy masonry told of a bridge long vanished. Over 2 hours must have passed before I reached what seemed to be my goal, a venerable ivied castle in a thickly wooded park, maddeningly familiar, yet full of perplexing strangeness to me. I saw that the moat was filled in, and that some of the well-known towers were demolished, whilst new wings existed to confuse the beholder. But what I observed with chief interest and delight were the open windows, gorgeously ablaze with light and sending forth sound of the gayest reverie. Dancing to one of these, I looked in and saw an oddly dressed company, indeed making merry and speaking brightly to one another. I had never seemingly heard human speech before and could guess only vaguely what was said. Some of the faces seemed to hold expressions that brought up incredible remote recollections. Others were utterly alien. I now stepped through the low window into the brilliantly lighted room, stepping as I did so from my single bright moment of hope to my blackest convulsion of despair and realization. from my single bright, the nightmare was quick to come. Apologies. For as I entered, there occurred immediately one of the most terrifying demonstrations I had ever conceived. Scarcely had I crossed when there descended upon the whole company a sudden and unheralded fear of hideous intensity, distorting every face and evoking the most horrible screams from nearly every throat. Flight was universal, and in the clamor and panic, several fell in a swoon and were dragged away by their madly fleeing companions. Many covered their eyes with their hands and plunged blindly, awkwardly in their race to escape, overturning furniture and stumbling against the walls before they managed to reach one of the many doors. The cries were shocking, and as I stood in the brilliant apartment alone and dazed, listening to their vanishing echoes, I trembled at the thought of what might be lurking near me unseen. At a casual inspection, the room seemed deserted, but when I moved toward one of the alcoves, I thought I detected a presence there, a hint of motion beyond the golden arch doorway, leading to another and somewhat similar room. As I approached the arch, I began to perceive the presence more clearly, and then, with the first and last sound I ever uttered, a ghastly ululation that revolted me almost as poignantly as its noxious cause, I beheld in full frightful vividness and an inconceivable, indescribable, and unmentionable monstrosity which had by its simple appearance changed a merely company into a herd of delirious fugitives. I cannot even hint what it was like, for it was a compound of all that is unclean, uncanny, unwelcome, abnormal, and detestable. It was the ghoulish shade of decay, antiquity, and desolation, the putrid dripping eidolon of unwholesome revelation, the awful bearing of that which the merciful earth should always hide. God knows it was not of this world, or no longer of this world. Yet to my horror, I saw in its eaten away and bone-revealing outlines a leering, abhorrent travesty on the human shape. And in its moldy, disintegrating apparel, an unspeakable quality that chilled me even more. I was almost paralyzed, but not too much so to make a feeble effort toward flight. A backward stumble, which failed to break the spell in which the nameless, voiceless monster held me. My eyes, bewitched by the glassy orbs which stared loathsomely into them, refused to close, though they were mercifully blurred and showed the terrible object but indistinctly after the first shock. I tried to raise my hand to shut out the sight, yet so stunned were my nerves that my arm could not fully obey my will. The attempt, however, was enough to disturb my balance, so that I had to stagger forward several steps to avoid falling. As I did so, I became suddenly and agonizingly aware of the nearness of the carrion thing, whose hideous hollow breathing I half fancied I could hear. Nearly mad, I found myself yet able to throw out a hand to ward off the fetid apparition which pressed so close, when in one cataclysmic second of cosmic nightmarishness and hellish accident, my fingers touched the rotting outstretched paw of the monster beneath the golden arch. I did not shriek, but all the fiendish ghouls that ride the night wind shrieked for me, as in that same second there crashed down upon my mind a single and fleeting avalanche of soul-annihilating memory. I knew in that second all that had been. I remembered beyond the frightful castle and the trees, and recognized the altered edifice in which I now stood. I recognized, most terrible of all, the unholy abomination that stood leering before me as I withdrew my sullied fingers from its own. But in the cosmos, there is a balm as well as a bitterness, and that balm is nepathy. In the supreme horror of that second, I forgot what had horrified me, and the burst of black memory vanished in a chaos of echoing images. In a dream, I fled from that haunted and accursed pile and ran swiftly and silently into the moonlight. When I returned to the churchyard place of marble and went down the steps, I found the stone trap door immovable. But I was not sorry, for I had hated the antique castle and the trees. Now I ride with the mocking and friendly ghouls on the night wind. And by day, among the catacombs of Neferkai, in the sealed and unknown valley of Hadoth by the Nile, I know that light is not for me, save that of the moon over the rock tombs of Nib, nor any gaiety save the unnamed feasts of Nitocris beneath the Great Pyramid. Yet in my new wildness and freedom, I almost welcome the bitterness of alienage. For although Nephthene has calmed me, I know always that I am an outsider, a stranger in this century, and among those who are still men. This I have known ever since I stretched out my fingers to the abomination within the great gilded frame, stretched out my fingers and touched a cold and unyielding surface of polished glass. Whoa, golly, that's a yarn, ain't it? It's definitely of some length, but there is something to be said about its wandering and its meandering and what it does. As far as I'm concerned, it's a wonderful tale because you don't know what it is that the tale's about. He doesn't have any practical self-awareness, or should I say it doesn't have any practical self-awareness. It doesn't have a reflection until that moment in the mirror. Most of its own existence seems a mystery, one of neglect, possible abuse, but certainly alienation to an extent that is almost incomprehensible. There are many points of relation that I share with this being, and I think that anyone who is a deep enough thinker who values time alone, there's a lot of comparisons. But it's not, whatever it is, it's not human. It was enough to clear a room. And it recognizes itself that it's not much to look at. But it's intelligent enough to know that and to dwell on it, which is, come what may, that seems a bit worse. He seems like he's a living night terror. Like he's the stuff of nightmares come to life. He's only just barely able to grasp how terrible that truly is until the end. And then it's shattered. I love Lovecraft. This isn't my favorite tale, but this is one of my favorite tales of his. And it's nice to read it again. I haven't read it in many years. David, what did you think of that story and the read?
I'm trying to equate it to the Robert Graves poem in this moment of recognition, and how taken to an extreme, which is sometimes done in art for effect, and which may on the surface seem artificial, is actually very important as a structure or creation for the imagination, because what we're talking about is, as Jordan Peterson might say, the ultimate minority, which is the individual. And we are all individuals. And there's a moment when the first time one will hear one's voice recorded, or they will see themselves after their hair has been cut by someone who didn't do a very good job at, the barber, who and you're shocked at what you see, or you've been out drinking all night and you look in the mirror the next morning and you don't recognize the person staring back at you. So you can look at it humorously, or you can take the route of horror, which that depends on the temperament of the reader, I suppose. But I would be interested to hear if anyone. I know that James Whale considered horror to be only interesting. This is the man who directed Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein. He only thought horror was interesting when it was humorous. So I would like to hear your gentleman's opinion on that.
Well, when it comes to humorous, this creature, whatever he is, I don't think he has the vaguest conception of humor. But there is, I suppose, in some way, something. I mean, I don't even know. Tom, what do you think? How do you feel about horror and humor? And
Well, as far as James Whale is concerned, his two greatest films, Bride of Frankenstein and The Invisible Man, are loaded with humor. It's some of it's a little black, but it's they're very funny films. I mean, the Invisible Man in particular, as he's slowly going insane and he's doing these wild things. It's we are watching. It's funny, but the people in the film are absolutely horrified. You know, we see somebody sitting there, all of a sudden he gets strangled. But you think, oh man, or with a bicycle riding down the street by itself. Everybody watching it is absolutely speechless. But it's a funny moment when So I know David knows both films. Bride of Frankenstein is filled with humor, of a horrifying nature. The little homunculuses in the jars, and the scene in the graveyard when the monster meets Dr. Pretorius, and he learns about cigars, and the blind man scene, when he's offered espresso. Oh, he's not offered espresso. My goof. Anyway.
well, yeah, and I guess there's something humorous about the interaction of monstrosity with normality.
Right.
Maybe that's a way to put a handle on it. Because at the end of the day, you have to, when you're unsettled by someone's appearance or someone's attitude, you have to quickly make accommodations, or you have to vacate, like they did in the story. They all fled in terror. There was no humor in that room, nor in the creature's psyche when he confronted himself in the mirror and his whole existence was redefined. But
the James Whale thing, I think Mel Brooks did an absolutely brilliant job of accessing the humor in Young Frankenstein over horror, the kind of a flip side to the James Whale films.
Yeah, that's a heavier hand, I would say, though, with the, yeah. But I think one of the points I'm trying to make is that there's an intensity in horror like this, or an absolute dread that shuts down the mind of the person, the reader, or the person viewing the work of art. Whereas humor can maintain this sort of this zone of safety that the reader can occupy, and then they can reflect. So I think that both are valid, actually. So I'm kind of curious about the relationship between drama and comedy and humor and horror. And that's one of the things that was going on in my mind while Ricky was reading the story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, there's that break between what is alienated and the alienator. So this being was in seclusion, and now he's exposed to society, and he's rejected. Instinctively, they flee from him as if he were abhorrent. So
He is.
that's, yeah. And that's something to reflect on, someone's own abhorrence, if they were ever to notice it. Whereas the other old man in the poem, when he was looking at the mirror, he still felt young. He still felt as if he could court the queen. But this
He felt
creature
vital.
can't. He did. He felt vital, but this creature couldn't possibly imagine any of that. He has no use for it. He has no ability to plug into it. So,
I think maybe he's further down the road than Mr. Lovecraft was. He's accepted. He's faced this horror in the mirror many times, and he's become introspective about it, and he's accepted the reality in a way that Lovecraft. And I think actually I can see the appeal in Lovecraft very much. And I'm coming late to this. So I'm finding the whole experience of talking to people who are Lovecraftian fanatics very fun because it's very special territory in horror, unlike anything else.
Right.
it's the horror of evolution and the horror of internal struggle. Um, it's many, many things.
It's also there's a lot. There's the horror of the individual being unaccepted.
Yep, yep.
And the horror of the unknown, which Lovecraft always wrote about. In fact, his greatest quote is, "There are a lot of fears, but the greatest fear is the fear of the unknown."
Yeah, the greatest and oldest, if I remember.
Oh yes,
But
greatest and oldest fear.
yeah,
And
and
he did a job on that theme.
you could say that again. It was said, though, I saw a documentary about him, and it was said that his mother was very abusive to him. She used to say that he was ugly and whatever, and he might have taken that to heart. You look at the man, there's nothing particularly upsetting about his appearance, but this may be what he thought he looked like. I always wondered about that as far as this story, like why is he carrying on in such a desperate way? And then you realize maybe this is how he felt about himself. I don't know.
Yeah, he was not comfortable in his own skin at all.
No,
He hated being in his own skin.
It's true. It's true.
So
yeah. Well, I think we've went over the whole reflecting concept. It's in the eye of the beholder. If you're an old man who still feels young at heart, the mirror is nothing. But if you're a monster from some cyclopean abyss that crawls up into the upper overworld, and you happen to chance on a party and then a mirror, you can see how abhorrent you are and how inhuman your appearance is and how they flee from you in terror. That's a different reflection completely, isn't it?
Yep.
So that's how mirrors are.
One, the thing that I always reflected on that struck me as very, very true is his journey from the lower depths to the surface, as if he was being born, right?
It's true. Yeah, it's true. It is an emergence for certain. Yes. Yeah. It's different that way than the rats in the walls. The rats in the walls, the being's going down, like he's descending as if into hell. This is a person who's emerging and coming out of some kind of, it feels like a limbo,
I think it's a birth because he states in there he could not go back.
Yeah,
right?
That is true. And it seems like the way he got out was an accident. Like it wasn't meant to have happened. It's like something he figured out.
Like in Edward Scissorhands, perhaps. I mean, he's kept in this castle, and one day he wanders out of and down into the of all places, a suburb in an American city, which is the last place that something like him should be.
Actually, that movie's like a kind of a version of The Outsider.
Yeah.
In a way, very much so.
I haven't thought of it that way, but yeah, I suppose you're right. Well, time flies when you're having fun, folks. But you know, these shows come and go. We have a blast making them. I hope my reading wasn't too staggered. It's been a long day for me, long day for everyone. But it was really great to be able to read that stuff and to go over it, to talk about it, to go over the poetry of this kind of horrific reflections. And I think we all learned a little something today, which is the name of the game. This has been JWC Sublimated Poesy with Ricky and David, with special guest Tom Tiernan. We did a horror poem and a horror story for you. Please go sign up. Go to joeswriters.club. Sign up on our forums. Go to joeswritersclub.com. Check out our blogs and our author pages. And head over to our Facebook, our Twitter, and most importantly, our YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. We're trying to grow so that we can do more for the writing community. Other than that, I don't have anything to plug. David, do you have anything to plug?
Yes, I really want people to attend Thursday nights. We have sort of an analysis of fiction, sort of an autopsy of fiction, led by Ricky and Tom, and I highly recommend it to everyone.
All right. Tom, how about you, man?
Oh, a plug. I've got 2 books, collections of short stories, creepy short stories on Amazon. Dwellers in the Shadows is the first one. The second one is It Still Out There? I have to say some of them are inspired by Lovecraft in a way that he always has been, my whole life. So, yeah,
right on. Tom's got killer shorts, folks. Head over to Amazon and check it out. Tom Tiernan. There's a whole lot waiting for you there. Thanks a lot for listening. Check us out, help us out so we can help you out. This is JWC, Joe's Writers Club, JWC Sublimated Poesy, and we're going to sign off. Take care. See you later, folks.